welcome to episode 300 of Late Night Linux, recorded on the 21st of September 2024. I'm Joe, and with me are Graham.
Oh, hello.
Will.
Hello.
And Popey.
Pip, pip.
Yes, so, special announcement, we've fired Failing. We finally got rid of him and his KDE bollocks and replaced him with Popey. No, not really. He's just travelling for work and missed the most important episode ever.
KDE is great, though.
Oh, yeah, it's great. Yeah. So thank you, Popey, for standing in again. Do you still want people to subscribe to your newsletter?
No, don't bother.
Okay. Just listen to Linux Matters instead, linuxmatters.sh. Right, so we're going to do a special 300th episode spectacular. And by that, I mean we're going to look back over the last 7 and a bit years. Late Night Linux started in January 2017, so we're going to look back at some of the biggest stories and trends of that 7 and a bit years.
Are you going to process this so it sounds like 1920s radio?
Yeah.
Also, 7 and a bit years doesn't really have the kind of ring resonance. 7 and a bit years.
Yay! Here we go.
Don't worry, it's going to be the cat's pajamas. It's going to be the bee's knees. Anyway, right, let's start with gaming. So, between November 2019 and January 2023, so just over 2 years, Stadia was launched and then shut down by Google.
God, when you put it like that, that's not long at all, is it, for a major endeavor by Google? That's awful.
Yeah, it really just makes you not want to trust anything they ever do, ever.
Yeah.
Stadia seemed doomed from the start. I don't think I was here talking about it then, but when we were talking about it and have talked about it amongst other circles, nobody really understood, well, nobody I spoke to anyway, really understood why it should need to exist. So I don't think anybody was really surprised when it got shut down. It seemed inevitable from the beginning.
I don't know. The inevitable march of GPUs in your gaming workstation computer, where it's like a relentless march to pay 500 to 800 quid every couple of years to get the next GPU. If you could just offload that and it's in the cloud and it's fast and you can just spin up any game you like, within reason. That's the dream that we were sold. I think it's compelling, especially if you can't afford to join that GPU bandwagon, then yeah, I think it is compelling, but it didn't work, obviously.
The latency of it going to the cloud and back again was always going to be a problem. And if you're the sort of person that wants to play brand new games, then you're going to be the same sort of person that buys that new hardware anyway, aren't you?
I don't know. It depends. If you're playing that game with the cat, Stray or whatever it's called, or Cyberpunk 2077 or whatever it is, that are not like Twitch games. I mean, there is a bit of an element of, a cat trying to balance and, time jumps and stuff like that. So yeah, there is some timing to it. But I think you're right in that, like COD and Twitch games and games where you have to headshot people at exactly the right time. Probably not. But I think there is a class of game that needs a GPU and probably could have been streamed.
I think if you could have transferred your game licenses to Stadia and transferred them out, it might have been more acceptable. But having to buy the games inside Stadia, it just seemed wrong.
Right.
Without the trust, anyway, without 20 years of heritage.
Yeah, if you could log on to your Steam account inside Stadia, that probably would have nailed it.
Was that its undoing then? Nobody trusted Google to keep it around long enough to invest, hundreds, perhaps even thousands of pounds on games with no guarantee that it was going to be there next week.
Yeah, I think that is exactly it. No one trusted it to survive, so it didn't survive. Well, speaking of Steam, Proton was first announced in August 2018. And then, of course, the Steam Deck came along in February 2022. And that has really changed the state of play when it comes to Linux gaming.
Has it? Has it really? Is it not just exactly the same as it was before, but with a bit of extra compatibility so you could play a few more games more easily than you could before?
I think it has. I buy games quite a bit on the Steam Deck because of the stupid sales they put on, and I've got hundreds of games in the backlog I never play. And I don't even think about whether they're compatible now. I don't even look for Steam Deck compatibility. I bought some Space Hulk game last week when it was £1.50, and it just worked. I didn't even check. So I could never do that in 2017.
That's fair. I think I'm a little bit bent out of shape about it because the games that I want to play won't play on the Steam Deck. And so my Steam Deck is basically playing retro games. There was this tantalizing glimpse of the future where games that only work on Windows would definitely work on Linux. And it was the things like BattleEye and the other anti-cheat stuff, which is still taking games away from us. Even today, like GTA 5 is now no longer able to be played using Proton. It's stuff like that I find frustrating. It's like I realize there's a whole wealth of games that have been enabled by this. I get it. But there was this tacit promise, this suggestion, this tease when it first came out that those games that we really, really wanted, we just can't have. So yeah, the library's bigger, but it's not enough.
It's never enough for you, is it?
No.
I'd read that Valve was going to work with Rockstar to try and solve those problems with the cheat stuff in GTA. So maybe that will come back.
Well, they said that when Proton was first launched, that they'd work with BattleEye and the other one, Easy Anti-Cheat or whatever the other one is. And how many years later? And it still doesn't work. Rust pulled out of making Linux builds and it doesn't work under Proton. And there's plenty of other high-profile, top-tier games that don't work under Steam. So, yeah, it's never enough.
You're right. I can see where you're coming from, but there are still thousands of games that you can just play on Linux that we never had before. Maybe they're the kinds of games that I play, kind of weird games, I suppose. But, that's still something that we'd never imagined previously. Just to give it some balance. I know what you're saying.
No, I agree with you. There's games that I probably have bought and I haven't even thought about looking at the compatibility, and I've just bought it and gone, oh, that works.
And also what Proton is doing, sometimes with equivalent performance, sometimes even better performance, is just miraculous. It's amazing.
It's like voodoo. It is magic, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, more on that next week, probably, and it'll be a bit more positive, I suspect. Let's move on to Canonical. We've seen, over the last 7 and a bit years, Canonical move from the sort of Linux for human beings, fun, community distro to a very, very serious company that is intent on doing an IPO. So March 2017, we saw the first extended security maintenance. So instead of just 5 years for Ubuntu 12.04, it was extended to 10 years. And then very shortly after that, they abandoned Unity and the phone. And then just after that, Canonical starts IPO path. And then in March of this year, they expanded that long-term support to 12 years, starting with Ubuntu 14.04. So it all strikes me as this pivot that happened in 2017 towards being a very serious enterprise company and not just Shuttleworth's plaything.
Why not both? It can still be Shuttleworth's plaything and also a serious corporate entity. The downsizing in 2017, which was really sad for those of us who worked there at the time, and the deprioritization of Unity, which was also sad for those of us who really enjoyed it, and for those people who suddenly in the community started speaking up that they miss it and they loved it, for sure. But I think right now, Canonical is probably in a better place. The whole ESM stuff, I think, is great. I see a lot of people bitching and moaning online about the fact that Canonical are holding updates behind a paywall, but these are updates you wouldn't have got. And so it's bonus content as far as I'm concerned. And I enable it on every single machine I have. And I have a lot of Ubuntu machines and I have it enabled everywhere. And I haven't paid a dime because it's free for a certain number of machines and community contributors. So I really value that ESM because I get extra updates. And I think the greater focus that Canonical has had since 2017 is a good thing.
Yeah, I totally agree with Popey's sentiments there. It is a good thing. If we want Ubuntu to continue, it needs to be commercially successful. Pockets are only so deep, and sooner or later, the primary sponsor of Ubuntu, will get bored of losing all that money. So if we want Ubuntu to be around and be successful, it has to be bringing in the money. And there's a certain amount of truth to the idea that if you give it away for free, then it's not worth anything. And so starting to charge for it kind of sets the level that it is a professional thing that is worth paying for. And I think that has contributed to the longevity of Ubuntu from that point. I think long may it continue.
Do I need to bust out my Bob Geldof impression again and get everyone to get out their wallets?
Well, I'm sure the IPO will be great news for everyone involved. Red Hat, then.
I see what you did there, Joe.
So October 2018, IBM to acquire Red Hat. And then December 2020, CentOS project shifts focus to CentOS Stream. And then in June 2023, we had the change of policy, shall we say, with regards to the RHEL source code. It's not been a great time since 2018, has it, when IBM bought Red Hat?
Everyone, as I remember it anyway, everyone was really concerned that Red Hat would lose some of its FOSS credentials and turn into the sort of main money engine inside IBM. And I don't think that that is necessarily exactly what's happened, but we definitely saw a watering down of Red Hat's, whatever you want to call it, like community ethos, I think.
There's certainly been some people who've been reallocated or had their focus on desktop-related stuff, Linux desktop-related stuff, moved to other things. Like people we recognize in Red Hat as significant contributors are now focused on other things, like the priorities that Red Hat have, like in-vehicle entertainment systems or other embedded systems that aren't laptop and desktop focused. And so you can gather from that they're focused in a similar way to Canonical on those things that bring in revenue. And, you don't pay however many squillions of pounds IBM did for Red Hat and then not expect some return on that investment. And the return on the investment isn't just goodwill. It's got to be money in the bank. And you don't generally get money in the bank from people downloading and installing a Linux ISO.
Yes, but IBM acquired a very profitable Red Hat. It was making a lot of money. And so they could have just not done anything, not made any changes, and it would have continued to make a shitload of money.
I'm not sure any CEO of a very large, like top 10 software company on the planet buys another company and then does nothing with it. I think that's just fanciful. And past experience tells us that even if they are a doyen of the open source world and we love them and they employ a ton of people who do massive amounts of contributions, you should set your expectations a lot lower that these people will be reallocated to doing work that is profitable for the parent company.
I think from my perspective, I'm not so critical now. It's sad that those days of Red Hat have gone, but I kind of feel that as an open source project, they kind of reached enlightenment. And of course, that means that they've been subsumed into IBM and maybe the capitalist system. But it also leaves plenty of opportunity for other people to try and do the same kind or similar kind of things. How long could we have Red Hat being that kind of dominant superpower in open source? And it's an opportunity for us somehow to fill the vacuum.
I will just never forgive them for the bullshit rug pull of the RHEL source code. I mean, it's clearly within the letter of the law, and they haven't done anything wrong as such, but it was still a shit move.
Technically correct is best correct, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it just tarnished them in my mind now and just makes me not want to use Fedora and stuff.
Well, I'm still running CentOS without any problems.
Yeah, weird how the CentOS Stream thing didn't affect you.
Yeah. My skills are too elite.
Yeah.
It's interesting at work, someone filed a bug against one of our products when running it on Red Hat. And everyone kind of like stood around shrugging, looking at each other going, well, we haven't got any Red Hat machines. How do we test this? How do we reproduce this thing? And then you go and log on and it's like a faff to try and get hold of a copy of Red Hat in order to reproduce a bug in an open source project that's being used by another person on a Red Hat system. And so we went hunting around for Alma and Rocky Linux rather than give Red Hat any money, because we can't just keep doing that every time someone needs to reproduce a bug.
I'm pretty sure you could have got it as a developer, though.
I logged into my developer account and everything had disappeared. There was nothing there for me to download. I could get nothing.
Weird.
Yeah. Emails to Joe at...
Okay, this episode is sponsored by people who support us with PayPal and Patreon. Go to latenightlinux.com/support for details of how you can support us too. Patreon supporters have the option to listen to episodes without ads like this. And it's not just this show. There's 2.5 admins about system administration, Linux Matters for upbeat, family-friendly adventures, Linux After Dark for silly challenges and philosophical debates, Linux Dev Time about developing with and for Linux, Hybrid Cloud Show for everything public and private cloud, and Ask the Hosts for off-topic questions from you. You can even get some episodes a bit early. We've got a lot going on, and it's only possible because of the people who support us. So, if you like what we do and can afford it, it would be great if you could support us too at latenightlinux.com/support. Mozilla then. So according to StatCounter, which let's not put too much faith in these numbers, but it's a number. In January 2017, Firefox had 6.75% market share, which was already shit. Now, 2.74%. And weirdly, a month after we started, Mozilla acquires Pocket. And in the announcement, they said, as a result of this strategic acquisition, Pocket will become a wholly owned subsidiary of the Mozilla Corporation and will become part of the Mozilla open source project. Still waiting on that one, 7 and a bit years later.
Okay, this is Wikipedia. Revenue derived from Google for Mozilla Foundation in 2017 was $522 million.
Wow. Holy cow.
And just over the last week or so, Mozilla to shut down their Mastodon instance.
It costs too much.
Both users are upset.
Well, also, according to Ryan Bauman on Mastodon, Mozilla, reading the room extremely well, seemingly just recently flipped the switch to enable by default sponsored weather results from AccuWeather in every new Firefox tab you open. Clicking Learn More takes you here to a link with zero information on if your location is sent to AccuWeather every time you open a new tab. So I don't know about that. I don't know how bad that is, but it wouldn't surprise me if they had just done that without thinking of the consequences.
When you look back, and I guess people smarter than me will write the history books, and in my mind, those history books will be littered with comments about Mozilla being run by a bunch of well-meaning hippies with no business sense. And that's how I feel they have been run, is a bunch of people who just don't have a fucking clue what they're doing. And they've got a giant pile of money from Google and they're just spaffing it up the wall to see what works.
Well, I've got a plan, right? Now, I don't think that I could execute on this because I don't know enough people and I don't have the business acumen.
You're going to buy Pocket off of Mozilla.
I'm going to buy Pocket, yeah. No, this is what someone should do, right? Someone should work out which is the best downstream fork of Firefox. Work with them to somehow attract the key developers from Mozilla to come over. Now, this is going to cost tens of millions of dollars per year, I think, to do all the infrastructure, the salaries, all the rest of it. So you're going to need to have donations from the community and you're going to need to have a deal with Microsoft, like I talked about a few weeks ago, to put Bing as the default search. And someone who knows enough people could put this together and we could have a proper hard fork of Firefox. What do you think?
I think you'd have even less than the 2.74% market share that Mozilla has now.
And at least you'd have a decent browser.
Well, I refer the honourable gentleman to our previous conversation a couple of episodes ago where it's not for you and me. It's for all of those other people out there.
Well, it's only got to be good enough for Microsoft to pay enough money to keep it going. If you're not aiming for world domination, it doesn't really matter. All it's got to do is be self-sustaining. I think that is achievable. I think you're right. It would be tens of millions a year, but I think it's doable.
What's the advantage for Microsoft? Surely Microsoft Edge browser has higher than 2.74% already?
Somebody forgot Microsoft loves open source.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. I think the very idea of selling a hard fork of Firefox that bakes in the evil empire, in inverted commas, that some people see Microsoft as, feels like a hard sell.
But it's the only realistic way you're going to get enough money to pay enough of the proper Mozilla developers to do the job. It is a pipe dream, yes. And I definitely don't know enough people to pull it off, but maybe someone out there does. Maybe someone's already doing this. Maybe the conversations are already in place. And this time next year, we'll have a real fork, a real hard fork of Firefox.
Put it in your predictions, Joe.
Yeah, I think I will. Right, Microsoft then. So in June 2018, Microsoft bought GitHub. That was quite controversial at the time, I think.
Yeah, now it's kind of part of the culture. I just associate the two things together.
Yeah, there was a whole bunch of people who rage quit and signposted their other forges, which, is fine. And it's, they can put their source code wherever they want. And also there seems to be quite a surge in other forges, like this Source Hut and Git and GoGit and Forgeo, or however you pronounce it, I don't know. There's a whole bunch of these other open source Forge softwares, including Launchpad, in fact, that you could put your software and self-host or put it in the cloud or anyone's computer and host your own software repository. You don't have to be tied to Microsoft. The problem is the network effect of it's really easy to contribute to something when it's on GitHub, but it turns out it's actually not that much harder to contribute to a piece of software that's hosted elsewhere. And I tested this a little while ago and I talked about it on Linux Matters. I contributed to 2 distros that were not on GitHub and it was perfectly fine and not hard work and not difficult.
It does feel a bit like we've got GitHub at home, though, doesn't it?
I don't think the ease of contribution is necessarily GitHub's selling point. It's just, it is the de facto standard. I sometimes, regularly really, just browse the what's new page, or whatever they call it, on GitHub to see what new things have spun up. And I do that on GitHub because that's where most things are. It's not good news for the other ones, but I don't think it's bad news for GitHub. I don't think that Microsoft have spoiled it. I think it is still a sensible place to host your code.
The elephant in the room is new software developers, as in those below the age of 25, don't give a shit. And they just put it on GitHub and they don't care. And they often don't even put a software license in there. They just upload their code and they're done. Move on to the next project. They don't care. It doesn't matter to them. And they're definitely not the people who are going to say, yes, but Microsoft will extinguish your project. They're not going to think that because that happened 20 years before they were born.
Well, they're probably all just using WSL2 anyway, which was announced in May 2019. Now, we'd had WSL, the original one, which was more like a kind of reverse wine, whereas WSL2 is based on just a VM, but it's a very tightly integrated VM. And my experiences of testing it have been pretty positive. So I can see how someone trapped in Windows world who wants Linux would use it. And it seems to have been very successful. My understanding is the number of people using it is extremely high, perhaps even higher than all of desktop Linux combined, but I don't have any actual stats on that.
I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case.
No, just the sheer number of Windows machines out there. It's just a numbers game, isn't it? Just a small percentage of them is a bigger number than all the desktop Linux machines.
Indeed, it is maths, yes.
And then in June 2021, they announced Copilot, GitHub Copilot, that is, which was trained on all of GitHub. And suddenly everyone was like, that's why they bought GitHub. Right, I see.
I was browsing a repository on GitHub the other day and I looked at a pull request and there was a tick box when you did your pull request that says, I assert that no AI was used in the creation of this code.
The backlash, eh?
Yeah, I guess some people are a bit twitchy about the idea of having AI generate their code and having the questionable license on the code that's generated based on something that could have been GPL or some other viral or whatever you want to call it license. Yeah, people are a bit twitchy about this.
Yeah, people use the term laundering, stuff like that.
I do think this illustrates the problem of huge mega corporations like Microsoft and the influence they have when they buy things like GitHub. I can't imagine in 2018 that AI was particularly on their radar. I'm sure they knew that the data was valuable, but probably didn't know how. in the same way Facebook did. But because they have this kind of dominance, they can make these moves. And it was a genius move. Now I can see, having all of that history, not the source code, the way that projects are evolved, the commit history, the way that code evolves. I mean, it's a treasure trove for them and something that they can just do easily considering the money that they've got. And we, as an open source community, cannot compete with that kind of knowledge. And I don't know how we even begin.
Well, you say that. Today, I downloaded one of the Mozilla Ollama LLMs and I ran it on my desktop. And my desktop has a GPU, but it's not an especially super whizzy one. It's a 2080 or something. And I asked it to write me some Python. I said, could you write me some Python that does a particular thing? And it said, yeah, sure, I could do that. And so I gave it a specification and it wrote the code. And this was not a Microsoft thing. This was a Mozilla LLM that's hosted in their repository and it's freely downloadable and it runs on Mac, Windows and Linux. And it's running totally locally on my own GPU, on my own hardware. And I can have a conversation with it and it can help me write code. It may not be as good as or trained on as wide a diaspora of software as GitHub Copilot, but it worked. And so I think we can compete if Mozilla survives.
I don't want to bring this into it, but it's a little bit like the working class. In fact, they have all the power. They do all the work. We have all the licenses and all the code. And yet the system, in a way, tries to make you look the other way. While in fact, we do have all of this that we can capitalize upon some way.
No war but class war.
Yeah.
All right, let's end with some positive news with a little bit of a sting in the tail, but still definitely positive. Let's talk about Linux on Mars. So in February 2021, Ingenuity, the Mars helicopter, made it to Mars. It was only supposed to do a few test flying missions. It massively exceeded expectations and plans and was flying until the end of 2023. We found out in January 2024 that that was it. It was done. But it was the first flight on another planet and it was powered by Linux.
It was very pleasant to see this little can-do chopper up in the air on Mars on a completely different planet. I love that. I absolutely love that. And I'm sure outside our little bubble of weird penguin nerds, nobody gives a shit. But actually, inside, we love it.
I particularly love the way NASA undersells everything. I think that's such a great way to go. So used to everything being turned up to like 11 and 400% performance. And I love the way they set modest goals that are perfectly acceptable and everybody agrees on and finances it. And then, wow, here we are. It survives for years later with many multiples more missions. And I love that.
Yeah, and it's now looking fairly promising that they will go with Linux again for future missions. So it very much more than proved that it's a capable kernel and system to run in space. So it's just a massive, massive success.
Yeah.
And a feel-good story that is all too rare these days.
I'm going to cry.
Well, we better get out of here then. Thank you everyone for listening for 300 episodes. Let us know if you have listened to all 300. show@latenightlinux.com. We'll be back next week when who knows what it'll be. But until then, I've been Joe.
I've been Graham.
I've been Will.
And I haven't been failing.
See you later.